Across Nazi Germany, families excitedly huddle around their radios. Today, January 30th, 1943, marks the 10th anniversary of Hitler's ascent to power. And Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring steps toward the microphone, about to broadcast a special celebratory address to the nation from Berlin. As the clock strikes 11 a.m., the sound of Göring's voice fills the airwaves, boasting about German achievements and the supremacy of his mighty Luftwaffe. But suddenly, the Reichsmarschall stops mid-sentence, his speech replaced by desperate cries of panic in the background, then pure static. It can only mean one thing: Berlin is under attack. But as Göring looks up, his face turns bright red. Dashing above him, he sees 3 unarmed aircraft, made of little more than plywood and glue. In the late 1930s, as Europe spiraled ever closer toward war, Britain's Royal Air Force faced a fundamental problem with its bombers. They were simply too slow to survive. The solution, according to conventional wisdom, was obvious: more guns. Defensive turrets, bristling with machine guns, armored positions for gunners, ammunition belts snaking through the fuselage. Most new bombers being developed at the time, such as the Avro Manchester and the Hadley Page Halifax, were designed to fight back with as much firepower as possible. But every gun added weight. Every turret added drag. The gunners themselves, their equipment, their oxygen supplies, their heated suits, all of it pushed these bombers slower and slower, making them more vulnerable targets for enemy fighters, meaning they would need even more guns to defend themselves, which would in turn make them even more sluggish. It was a vicious cycle that seemed impossible to break. Yet one designer thought he had the answer. Geoffrey de Havilland had built his reputation on speed. His DH-88 Comet Racer had dominated air races in the 1930s. His DH-91 Albatross airliner, constructed largely of wood, could cruise at 210 miles per hour, faster than many fighters of the previous decade. De Havilland wrote to Air Marshal Wilfred Freeman with a radical proposal. Forget the defensive armament entirely. Forget the turrets, the guns, the gunners. Build a bomber so fast that enemy fighters simply couldn't catch it, and build it not out of metal, but out of wood. His logic was straightforward. War would bring shortages of aluminum and steel, but wood remained plentiful. Wooden aircraft could be built by furniture makers and piano factories, freeing skilled metalworkers for Spitfires and Hurricanes. The clean aerodynamic design, stripped of turrets and guns, would slice through the air with minimal drag. Freeman thought de Havilland was onto something. During the Great War, he'd commanded a squadron of de Havilland DH-4s, one of the fastest bombers of that conflict, and he trusted the company's engineering instincts. However, Freeman was alone in his enthusiasm. The rest of the Air Ministry laughed the proposal out of the office. How was the wooden structure supposed to handle the stresses of high-speed flight and battle damage? How could furniture makers maintain the required precision tolerances? What would happen if the aircraft proved to be slower than expected, or if rival nations built faster fighters? It simply violated every principle of accepted bomber design. Lord Beaverbrook, Minister of Aircraft Production, called it Freeman's folly. In October 1938, de Havilland was told to forget about the project and instead focus on building wings for other bombers as a subcontractor. But de Havilland refused to give up. Over the next year, he continued quietly working on his wooden aircraft. By September 1939, he'd come up with preliminary estimates for both single and twin-engine versions, using different kinds of engines. With World War II now erupting across Europe, de Havilland hoped the Air Ministry might be more receptive to his ideas. While they were not as dismissive as they had been the previous year, there was still significant skepticism. Largely due to Freeman's clout, de Havilland was allowed to continue developing his design, and after several months of negotiations over the requirements, the demonstration of a full-scale mock-up led to the project finally receiving official backing in late December 1939. Determined to prove his doubters wrong, on January 1st, 1940, de Havilland declared that his aircraft, designated DH-98, would be, quote, the fastest bomber in the world, adding, quote, it must be useful. After an initial order of a single prototype, on March 1st, the contract was expanded to 50 aircraft. While concerns lingered about the effectiveness of an unarmed bomber, the project was given a major boost when it was decided that the DH-98 could prove useful in another role, that of a night fighter. With the request for a version to be armed with 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 machine guns, plus aircraft interception radar, the aircraft's future looked much more secure. By June, the DH-98 had been given a name: Mosquito. Despite continued interruptions during the subsequent months, including further attempts by Lord Beaverbrook to have the project scrapped, as well as significant lost factory time due to frequent air raid warnings during the Battle of Britain, by November, the first Mosquito prototype was finally ready. On November 25th, the prototype, painted bright yellow and coded E0234, prepared to make its maiden flight at Hatfield Airfield. Jeffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's son and the company's chief test pilot, climbed into the cockpit alongside John Walker, the chief engine installation designer. The two Merlin 21 engines roared to life, and the prototype lifted smoothly into the gray skies. The flight lasted 1 hour 42 minutes. When de Havilland landed, his report was cautiously optimistic. The aircraft handled well, controls were responsive, and it was exceptionally stable. The only issues were that the undercarriage doors, operated by bungee cords, remained partially open at speed, and the left wing had a slight tendency to drag, nothing that wasn't easily fixable. But when testing continued in December, more serious problems surfaced. At speeds between 240 and 255 miles per hour, violent buffeting shook the tail section. Airflow separating from the engine nacelle struck the tailplane, causing dangerous vibrations. Engineers attached wool tufts to study the airflow, then fitted slots to the nacelles and leading edge of the tailplane to smooth it out. Yet the buffeting persisted. By February 1941, they found the solution: triangular fillets on the wing's trailing edge and extended engine nacelles. The modifications worked. The buffeting stopped. With these issues smoothed out, it was now time for the Mosquito prototype, now known by its military serial number W4050, to face its greatest challenge yet: speed trials against a Spitfire Mark II. The Mosquito had twice the surface area and twice the weight of the Spitfire, but also twice the power. Engineers predicted it would be perhaps 20 miles per hour faster. They were wrong. The Mosquito reached 392 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, 32 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire's 360. At 6,000 feet, it left the Spitfire behind entirely. Freeman's gamble had paid off. The Mosquito was set to become the fastest operational aircraft in Britain. But its speed came with a price. Taking off in a fully loaded Mosquito required nerves of steel. Below a critical speed of 172 miles per hour, the highest of any twin-engine aircraft in the war, losing an engine meant certain doom. The pilot had just seconds to cut power to the remaining engine, or the aircraft would roll inverted into the ground. Mosquito pilots learned to ignore normal takeoff procedures entirely. They would keep the aircraft on the runway, no matter how long it took, only pulling up when they were mere yards from the far end. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and two highly trained crew members would be lost. Yet if the crews could master flying the Mosquito, the real test would come when Mosquitoes faced combat. And that day was rapidly approaching. The question remained: would speed alone actually keep crews alive when faced with an enemy? The Americans didn't seem to think so. In April 1941, U.S. General Henry Hap Arnold witnessed a demonstration flight and brought the complete design plans back to the U.S. 5 American aircraft manufacturers were asked to evaluate the Mosquito for potential production. Beechcraft's response summed up the general view, quote, "It appears as though this airplane has sacrificed serviceability, structural strength, ease of construction, and flying characteristics in an attempt to use construction material which is not suitable for the manufacture of efficient airplanes. The U.S. declined to build it, but in Britain, de Havilland pressed ahead. By fall 1941, the Mosquito was ready for its operational debut. On September 17th, a single Mosquito lifted off from RAF Benson on the aircraft's first operational sortie. Not a bombing mission, but photo reconnaissance. The unarmed PR Mark I, piloted by an experienced crew, climbed to 23,000 feet and crossed into German-occupied territory. 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s rose to intercept, closing in on what appeared to be an easy victory. But the German fighters couldn't keep pace. No defensive fire, no evasive maneuvers. The Mosquito used pure speed, completing its reconnaissance mission and returning to Britain untouched. It was exactly what de Havilland had promised, an aircraft that didn't need guns, because nothing could catch it. On November 15th, 1941, Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. delivered the first operational Mosquito B Mark IV, the bomber variant, to No. 105 Squadron at RAF Swanton Morley. He gave the squadron a demonstration flight that left the Blenheim crew members suitably impressed. Everyone, that is, except their air gunners, who no longer had a role. In January 1942, the night fighter variant arrived with No. 157 Squadron, which began replacing its Douglas Havocs. Yet production remained agonizingly slow. The months passed by, and the Mosquito was still waiting to carry out its first bomber mission. Finally, in late spring 1942, its moment arrived. On May 30th, RAF Bomber Command launched its first 1,000-bomber raid against Colonia, turning the German city into an inferno. While they did not participate in the main raid, 4 Mosquitoes performed a follow-up attack the next morning, dashing over what was left of Colonia in broad daylight to drop their bombs, photograph the damage, and race home. The pattern was set. Small numbers of Mosquitoes conducting high-speed daylight raids after major night attacks, hoping to disrupt German morale and industrial production by triggering air raid sirens across cities. In August 1942, Wing Commander Huey Edwards took command of No. 105 Squadron and refined their tactics. Instead of high-level raids, he ordered low-level attacks, timed to reach targets 20 minutes before dark. Crews would drop their bombs in daylight and escape under cover of darkness. Using this approach during fall 1942, No. 105 Squadron didn't lose a single aircraft to enemy fighters. In January 1943, the Mosquito would carry out its most daring mission yet. January 30th marked one of the most important dates of the Nazi calendar, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power. As part of the celebrations, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring was scheduled to deliver a major radio address at 11 a.m. from the main Berlin broadcasting station. Across Germany, citizens gathered around radios to hear the commander of the Luftwaffe speak. At precisely 11 a.m., 3 Mosquitoes from No. 105 Squadron arrived over Berlin. Flying at 20,000 feet, far above effective flak range, the wooden bombers released their payload. Just as Göring was beginning to speak, bombs struck around the building. His speech was cut off mid-sentence. Confused voices filled the background for a moment. Then the broadcast went dead. German radio scrambled to reschedule for later in the day. At 4 p.m., Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels prepared to deliver his own anniversary speech. Citizens again gathered around the radios, eager to hear the regime's message after the morning's embarrassing disruption. Yet the afternoon broadcast was interrupted, exactly like the morning's. On the most important propaganda day of the year, the Nazi leadership had been silenced twice by British bombers. The humiliation was complete. The psychological impact rippled across Germany. If the Luftwaffe couldn't protect Berlin, couldn't even protect scheduled radio broadcasts, what could it protect? The myth of invincibility was cracking. Göring's fury was legendary. Months later, lecturing German aircraft manufacturers, he would explode, quote, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminum better than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building, and they give it a speed which they've now increased yet again. What do you make of that? There's nothing the British do not have. They have the geniuses, and we have the nincompoops." Throughout the spring of 1943, Mosquito squadrons intensified their campaign against Germany. The raids came at all hours: daylight strikes on factories, dusk attacks on rail yards, high-altitude night missions over cities. German air defenses struggled to respond. On April 20th, No. 105 Squadron carried out another Berlin raid, specifically designed to anger the Nazi leadership, timing it to coincide with Hitler's 54th birthday celebrations. The Mosquitoes dropped their bombs with blistering accuracy before escaping with the loss of only 1 aircraft. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, took notice. If Mosquitoes could penetrate Berlin's defenses reliably, they could serve a far more valuable role than nuisance raids. In May 1943, Numbers 105 and 139 Squadron were transferred to the No. 8 Pathfinder Group. Their new mission combined their original bombing role with target marking for the heavy bomber streams. Mosquitoes would arrive first, drop marker flares on the target, then bomb alongside the Lancasters and Halifaxes that followed. It was the perfect role for the fast wooden bomber. Speed allowed them to arrive before German night fighters were fully alerted. Maneuverability helped them evade the flak that shredded slower aircraft. And with production finally accelerating, their growing numbers meant more Mosquitoes were available for increasingly complex operations. Yet the Germans were determined to rise to the challenge. That summer, humiliated by the repeated Mosquito attacks, Göring formed 2 new special Luftwaffe units dedicated specifically to hunting the wooden bombers. Jagdgeschwader 25, commanded by Oberstleutnant Herbert Ihlefeld, and Jagdgeschwader 50, under Major Hermann Graf, were formed with elite pilots and the best available aircraft. Yet they achieved almost nothing. The special squadrons proved ineffective against aircraft they could rarely catch. Meanwhile, Mosquito night fighters continued to hunt in the darkness. The Germans gave it a name, Moskitoschreck, mosquito terror, the constant fear that a wooden shadow might appear as you tried to land. Wing Commander Brantz Burbage became the RAF's most lethal night fighter pilot, claiming 21 German aircraft from his Mosquito's cockpit. When German pilots realized a Mosquito was stalking them, many chose to crash land immediately, rather than risk becoming another marking on a British fighter's nose. By early 1944, the Mosquito had proven itself in countless raids across occupied Europe. But on February 18th, the wooden bomber would face a challenge unlike any before, a prison break from the air. Inside Amiens prison in northern France, over 700 French resistance fighters awaited execution. Many were key members of underground networks, and losing them would cripple the preparations for the upcoming Allied invasion. A ground assault was impossible. Amiens was deep in German-occupied territory, while conventional bombing couldn't breach the 3-foot-thick walls without wiping out everyone inside. There was only one option, a precision attack by Mosquitoes. Operation Jericho demanded perfect execution. 19 Mosquitoes, from numbers 464, 487, and 21st Squadrons, would attack in 3 waves at extremely low altitude. The first wave would breach the outer walls. The second would destroy the guards' barracks. The third would hit the main prison building itself. Timing was critical. Hit too early, and the Germans would execute prisoners before they could escape. Hit too late, and the invasion opportunity would pass. The attack window was measured in minutes. The Mosquitoes crossed the English Channel at wave-top height and raced across the French countryside at 270 miles per hour, barely clearing hedgerows and trees. German flak opened up as they approached Amiens, but the wooden bombers were too low and too fast. The first wave's bombs punched through the outer wall precisely as planned. The second wave demolished the guards' quarters. Explosions ripped through the prison complex as German soldiers scrambled for cover. In the chaos, prisoners ran for the breached walls. Some 258 inmates escaped through the smoking gaps in the masonry, disappearing into the French countryside before German reinforcements could respond. But the cost was high. Group Captain Percy Pickard, the legendary pilot leading the raid, was lost after being shot down, along with 2 other Mosquitoes. What's more, the bombing claimed the lives of over 100 prisoners. The raid was controversial even then, with some questioning whether the civilian casualties justified the military objective. But those who escaped included vital resistance leaders whose networks would prove invaluable during the coming invasion. However, by the end of the year, the Mosquito finally met its match, and the Germans deployed an aircraft it couldn't outrun, the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. With speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, the twin-jet Me-262 was nearly 150 miles per hour faster than the Mosquito. For the first time since entering service over 2 years earlier, the Wooden Wonder couldn't rely on velocity alone to guarantee its survival. On January 13, 1945, Lieutenants Richard Kenny and Arnold Kuhn were flying a weather reconnaissance mission over Germany at 30,000 feet when they spotted 2 Me-262s approximately 4 to 5 miles behind them. Kenny immediately dove for a cloud layer near Hanover. The jets followed, closing rapidly, cannon fire flashing from their noses. For 9 terrifying minutes, from 30,000 feet down to 12,000, Kenny threw his Mosquito through violent corkscrew turns, while the Me-262 repeatedly attacked from all quarters. The German pilot fired burst after burst, but Kenny's desperate maneuvering prevented a clean shot. At 12,000 feet, either low on fuel or ammunition, the jet finally broke off the attack. The German pilot pulled alongside briefly, waved at the Mosquito crew, then turned back toward Berlin. Other crews faced similar encounters. On January 21st, Lieutenant Richard Geary and his navigator, Floyd Mann, flew an exhausting mission to Poland's Politz oil refinery, escorted by 4 P-51 Mustangs. Multiple Me-262s attacked during the flight. During one engagement, Geary threw his Mosquito into a desperate maneuver, a violent cartwheel across the sky, of which he later admitted, quote, I don't know what kind of maneuver this was, and it's a miracle the aircraft did not disintegrate. The Me-262 flashed past, feet from his canopy, the German pilot forced to break off to avoid a mid-air collision. However, not all encounters ended so well for the Mosquito. On March 20th, 1945, Lieutenant Roger Gilbert was attacked by an Me-262 over Germany. Cannon shells tore 4 feet off the Mosquito's outer left wing. Gilbert managed to wrestle the crippled aircraft back to England, but when he saw the repair process, he refused to get back into the cockpit. As he told his squadron commander, quote, "My God, Major, I'm not going to fly that damn plane." They cut the wing off, and all they did was glue another one back on. While jets posed a new threat in European skies, thousands of miles away, a more insidious enemy was destroying Mosquitoes. Mosquito squadrons had been deploying to India and Southeast Asia since 1944 to support operations against Japan, but within months, aircraft began experiencing catastrophic structural failures. Wings separated from fuselages mid-flight. Upper surfaces lifted away from the main spars. Crews perished in crashes that seemed to have no explanation. The initial investigation blamed the tropical environment. Major Hereward de Havilland traveled to India in December 1944 and produced a report which concluded, quote, "The accidents were not caused by the deterioration of the glue, but by shrinkage of the airframe during the wet monsoon season." The blame fell on climate, excessive heat, humidity, and termite damage. The wooden aircraft simply couldn't handle tropical conditions. But a subsequent inquiry told a different story. Investigators from the Ministry of Aircraft Production examined crashed Mosquitoes built at de Havilland's Hatfield and Leavesden plants. They found identical defects in 6 different marks, none of which had been exposed to monsoon conditions or termites. The problem wasn't the climate, it was the construction. The investigators' conclusion was damning, quote, "The standard of gluing left much to be desired. Manufacturing defects in British plants had created structural weaknesses that only revealed themselves under operational stress. The furniture makers and piano factories that had seemed like such an advantage now looked like a liability." Yet while accidents attributed to, quote, "loss of control" were 3 times more frequent in Mosquitoes than any other RAF aircraft, the Air Ministry chose to maintain Major de Havilland's initial findings, blaming climate rather than manufacturing, to avoid undermining confidence in the entire fleet. Despite the threat of jets and structural issues, the Mosquito remained operational through the war's final months. On May 21, 1945, 2 weeks after VE Day, Mosquitoes from numbers 143 and 248 squadrons flew the aircraft's last official European combat mission, hunting German U-boats that might refuse to surrender. By then, the bomber variant of the Wooden Wonder had achieved something remarkable: the lowest loss rate of any aircraft in RAF Bomber Command service, the concept that had seemed like madness in 1938. An unarmed bomber relying solely on speed had proven safer than heavily armed fortresses bristling with guns. Meanwhile, the fighter variants could claim 487 German aircraft destroyed, an impressive tally for an aircraft that had never been considered in that role when it was originally designed. Yet victory brought rapid obsolescence. With the war's end, the RAF demobilized quickly. Squadrons disbanded. Aircraft that had been indispensable months earlier became surplus almost overnight. Some remained in service into the 1950s, relegated to target towing and training duties, far removed from their combat glory. But eventually, most were all unceremoniously scrapped or burned on fire dumps. Of the 7,781 Mosquitoes built, only around 30 survive, with just 5 of them airworthy. The de Havilland Aircraft Museum in Hertfordshire, England, is home to 3 Mosquitoes, including W4050, the first prototype. It's the only initial prototype of a British World War II aircraft design that survived into the 21st century.